Hello, I'm Ravi Velloor, and this is an Asian Insider podcast. In this episode, I try to unpack recent developments on the US-China relationship, including President Donald Trump's summit meeting with President Xi Jinping in Beijing, and US Secretary of War Peter Hegseth's recent speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore that just concluded over the weekend. Few people are as competent to discuss these developments as my good friend Wang Xiangwei, the former editor-in-chief of the South China Morning Post and an eminent Hong Kong-based scholar on China. Mr. Wang, who teaches currently at Hong Kong Baptist University, offers a Chinese perspective on the evolving relationship between the world's two superpowers and what that could mean for Asia. Thank you for coming on Asian Insider, Wang Xiangwei.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for having me.
Xiangwei, we're speaking just a few days after the Shangri-La Dialogue concluded in Singapore. What did you think of Peter Hegseth's speech at the Shangri-La?
I watched the 2-day sessions, and what I find striking is this. You can only see how things have changed between China and the United States, the overall relationship, if you compare the two speeches given by Hegseth last year and this year. Mm-hmm. Before I came on this program, I reread the two speeches. I mean, the difference is so striking. Last year, the U.S. Secretary of War adopted a very fiery adversarial tone and focusing on China and highlighting the China threat, and particularly he highlighted the risk that Beijing was preparing to invade Taiwan. He repeated the old refrain that Beijing could attack Taiwan by 2027. And he even used the term imminent. And then he called upon the US allies in Asia-Pacific to unite and, using his words, to deter the Chinese aggression. And if you were there at the Shangri-La, and I watched on live broadcast, and then I just read his speech again. In his entire speech, he didn't mention Taiwan at all. And I mean, it's true. He noted the rightful alarm about China's historical military build-up, but he sort of spent more time talking about Trump and Xi Jinping's meeting in Beijing and sort of describing the summits as historic. And after his speech, my biggest takeaway is that as far as China is concerned, he has adopted what he said the new strategy by the U.S. military towards the Asia-Pacific. Those three words: strong, quiet, and clear. So, I'm writing a column for, I have a monthly column for my old employer, the South China Morning Post. And in fact, I'm working on the column right now. And that's one of the observations I'm going to write in. Yeah. I mean,
right. So
Ravi, what do you think?
We're here to talk about you. I'll talk to you in a second about that. But Xiangwei, you just talked about Hegseth and strong and quiet diplomacy, as he called it. Is this a tacit acknowledgement of China's status as a peer equal to the United States?
Yeah, that is my reading. You see, I wrote a couple of pieces on this. You see, Trump came to power in 2016 during his first term, that he basically sort of followed the sort of line from Joe Biden, trying to apply various pressure on China for China to cave, and China didn't. So from my point of view, that the uh, summit, the Seoul summit in South Korea last year, I think that marked for the first time that China was considered as a near peer to the United States. I mean, there was
You're
various
talking about
reasons.
the meeting in Busan
Yeah,
in
in
October.
Busan. Sorry, not in
Yes,
Seoul, in Busan in October last
right.
year. And that was the first time, from a Chinese perspective, that the U.S. sort of now considered China as a near peer, not least because Trump at that time invoked this concept of G2. As you
Hmm.
know, G2 first came into the geopolitical narrative back in 2005. At that time, China just joined WTO, and China became the world's factory, exporting stuff to the United States and then buying the U.S. debts. So the U.S. wanted China to become the little brother to work with the United States. And then China rejected that characterization. But even today, after Trump repeatedly invoked this concept,
Mhm.
China publicly still rejected this characterization. But right now, this is what China wants, although China will never publicly acknowledge the G2, which is that now China has become a near peer to the United States, and China wants to deal with the United States on an equal footing over everything. This kind of equal footing was also reflected in the summit
Mhm.
between Xi Jinping and Trump in Beijing last month.
Interesting. Xiangwei, you asked me what I thought of Hexet's speech, and let me tell you, there's one aspect of it which I found quite interesting. Uh, Throughout the speech, he never once made a reference to the term Indo-Pacific. He dropped Indo-Pacific and he just spoke about the Pacific throughout.
Yeah.
And my mind went back to the Shangri-La dialogue 8 years earlier during Trump's first term when James Mattis arrived here via Hawaii and he had just renamed U.S. PACOM as U.S. Indo-PACOM. And I know that Beijing never really fancied this Indo-Pacific terminology, which the Japanese and the Americans were pushing for almost a decade. What did you read of this deliberate change of nomenclature from Peter Hegseth?
Yes, you made an excellent point. That's also what I want to talk to you about. You see, after Trump came to power for the second term, much has been written about the China hawks in his cabinet. I think sort of we had some long-running joke about Trump's cabinet in terms of their views towards China. If you look at his cabinet, the Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, and the others, they're all very much anti-communist and anti-China. So, China sanctioned Rubio twice.
Rubio, yeah.
So we had this joke in this part of the world, which said that has made sort of Donald Trump the most China-friendly person in his cabinet. And so for the last year, as I mentioned earlier, if you read his speech from last year, it clearly showed sort of Pete Hegseth's attitude towards
Yeah.
China. He was very
Right.
adversarial. And then this year was like a night and day. He came across as an entirely different person, as you also
Right.
mentioned, in terms of
Right.
jobbing the
Yeah.
Indo-Pacific. I think
Right.
this has come back to the point you and I talked earlier, is that right
Right.
now the US has finally recognized China as a near peer. And
Right.
also the US finally recognized the importance of maintaining peer-to-peer dialogues with China. And this also shows that earlier there were concerns that the China hawks in his cabinet could prevent Donald Trump from forging a closer relationship with China when necessary. Now, it shows that those hawks have started to fall in line with Trump. As we all know, Trump has made it very clear, he will not treat anyone who he believes betrays him
Yes.
well. I think you made
Right.
a very, very interesting point. So that's, one of my views is, given the fact that Xi and Trump are scheduled to meet at least 3 more times, my view is that we are looking at a relatively long period of stability between China and the United States.
Right.
Because of the reasons we talk about, and also because of the reasons that the US now is preoccupied with the war against Iran, and they were probably going to make some moves against Cuba. So the US really needs a stable relationship with China. And from China's point of view, China also needs a stable relationship with the United States. The main reason is, as I often talk to people who came to see me, is that I think China's overriding priority is to grow China's economy. Right now, there are lots of problems with China's economy, the local government debts, the youth employment, the sluggish property market. So China wants to focus on growing the economy. For China to do that, China really needs a very stable international environment. And for China to do that, China needs to have a stable relationship with the United States.
Right. Obviously, as you just mentioned, Hegseth's remarks were conditioned by his president's trip to Beijing last month. No question about it. And, Trump's own body language in China was very careful. So were her words for a change. But this so-called constructive relationship of strategic stability, that's the phrasing that was agreed by Trump and Xi. A lot is being made of it. But Xiangwei, do you think this is genuine, or could this be just a tactical move?
You mean from China's point of view?
From both sides, what do you think?
I think China is very much genuine in sort of setting up the guardrails. The other interesting point I should make in terms of now China becoming a near peer with the United States is this: sort of until summits in Busan, South Korea last year, and also the Beijing summit in May this year. Before that, my impression is the US mainly sets the agenda for China-US relationship. And, US sees itself as the big brother, is the sole superpower. And US really buys into this adage that it wants to speak from the position of strength, and that's had been the case until last year. And now China, to talk about that, I could give you a sort of interesting context. You see, back in 2010, when China's president was Hu Jintao, and under Hu Jintao, China first tried to set a framework for China-U.S. relationship to move forward. And China came up with this concept of a great power relationship in terms of sort of managing the bilateral ties, trade, investment, Taiwan, human rights, and all that. And the U.S. never accepted this framework. And then by 2013, after Xi Jinping became the president of China, and Xi Jinping reoffered this framework to U.S. And since 2013, from 2013 to 2025 last year, the successive U.S. presidents had largely dismissed this concept. And now China has become a near peer, and now the U.S. has shown China the respect as a near peer. So now Xi Jinping at the Beijing summit now came out with this framework of constructive sort of strategic relationship. I think this time the United States cannot afford to dismiss it again. I think this is what China wants to me, this is the first time. Now China is sort of setting the agenda for China-U.S. relationship to move forward. So the previously is always fighting, and the U.S. set agenda, fighting. Now China now, it seems to me, is in the driving seat, trying to have this flesh out this framework. And what is interesting is that Mr. Trump also accepted this. I mean, if you look at the two-day summit in Beijing, Trump came to Beijing with his signature transactional style of leadership. He brought a sort of delegation of dozens of CEOs from the United States, and he was talking about deals. He wanted China to buy the 3 Bs, right? The beef, the beans, and the bones. And even though no deals were announced in Beijing, but in fact, Beijing has agreed in principle to buy the 3 Bs, the beef, the beans, and the bones. And then, but if you look at the summits, and then the Xi Jinping somehow came across as a kind of a statesman. He talked about Thucydides trap. He would talk about Taiwan. He talked about the framework of constructive strategic relationship. From where I sit, I believe now China now is trying to drive the bilateral ties moving forward. And sort of given the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, that the two leaders are going to meet at least 3 more times, I think there is cautious hope that the two leaders can work together to flesh out this framework and bring much needed stability for the two countries.
The reason I asked if this was a tactical move by Hegseth is because some of his remarks seem to suggest that strategic rivalry will continue. For instance, he talked about the U.S. spending $1.5 trillion on new defense technology. That was part of his remarks. My question, Xiangwei, is Can strategic stabilization coexist with strategic rivalry?
I mean, that's the other thing that I have been saying to people, which is that I think sort of starting from the Busan summit last year and the Beijing summit this year, it has basically signaled the arrival of a new normal in China-US relationship. So, so what does this new normal entertains? It basically means that first, China now is being recognized as a near peer to the United States by the international community, sort of particularly by the United States. So, which means the China and the United States will have this new normal in which they will compete sometimes or most of the times fearlessly over technology, AI, geopolitical developments in Asia Pacific. And then China and the United States will also cooperate on other issues in terms of global security, fighting crimes. You see, right now, one of the things that China and the US are now have resumed working together in terms of fighting drugs, narcotics, and also scams. In the past few years, every time the US officials came to China, they would talk about urging China to do more to curb the raw materials used to make the drug fentanyl, which has led to many deaths in the United States. And this time, this subject is no longer high in the agenda because the two sides are now working closely. And the second part is fighting the online scams. The online scams is running rampant everywhere. And China and the US are working on that, and also AI, and also North Korea. I think there were reports that Xi Jinping is soon to visit North Korea, maybe this week or next week. And also the SCMP reported yesterday that Trump personally asked Xi Jinping to intervene, to mediate the Middle East crisis. I think those are the things that I'm trying to say is that on certain issues, China and the US will compete very fiercely. On the other parts, on the other issues I mentioned earlier, that Beijing and Washington will cooperate, will have pragmatic cooperation for, their own national security reasons.
Xiangwei, you mentioned that huge business delegation that Trump brought along to China. People like Elon Musk and Jensen Huang, all these people were there. Now, one of the things that was spoken about was an agreement to have a board of trade and a board of investment. Do these really mean anything?
Yes, I think so. I think right now, the board of trade and the board of investments are very important tools for both sides to use to see how they can increase trade and investments in each other's countries. Sort of, let me give you an example. Right now, China wants to buy high-tech products, chips, and related equipment from the United States. And the US has imposed restrictions on the exports of high-tech products to China. And then in terms of investments, that Mr. Trump is very much concerned about the widening trade deficit between China and the United States. And, one idea both sides have been discussing is this, that China is willing to encourage Chinese firms to invest in the United States. But because of the previous anti-China hysteria, it was not very clear what sort of investments China can make in the United States. Me and others discussed this before. If you read the statements from the hawkish politicians in Washington, including the senators and the congressmen, and they even deemed the made in China garlic as a national security risk. I'm not joking. I mean,
Garlic?
if you type in the Chinese garlic U.S. national security in Google, and you will see. So this Board of Trade and the Board of Investments are very important tools which the two governments can use to say what kind of things that China can export more to the United States and what kind of things, sort of commodities that U.S. can export more to China. And I'm sure, as you and I talked about earlier, when Xi Jinping goes to Washington in September 24th and 25th, I think more details will come out of this Board of Trade and the Board of Investment. I think I talked to some U.S. sources in Hong Kong, and they told me that I think the trade and investment are the two things that the Trump administration is most concerned about. So they want reciprocity in terms of trade and investment, and that's also what China wants. If U.S. wants to export more to China, and then China say we also want to export more to the United States, and so they have to. It's a good thing that right now they are talking at various levels to flesh out the detailed measures in terms of investments and trade.
Right. The U.S. readout mentioned rare earths, but the Chinese readout did not seem to do that.
Yeah.
And today I read that China is desperately trying to buy tungsten in the United States. So this dependency is two-way, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of the readouts, I will not read too much into the readouts. It is with other countries as well. China will emphasize on the stuff that China wants to highlight, and then the US will do the same. But in terms of critical minerals, it shows that even though both governments, both countries, wants to reduce their dependence on supply of critical technologies and critical minerals, but it's impossible for them to decouple totally. So in terms of the rare earth and tungsten, as you can see, that's a very good example that the two countries will have to work together. It's because it's unlike in the Cold War, where the United States and the Western countries sort of didn't have to do business with the Soviet Union blocs. But in terms of this relationship between China and the United States, the economies are entwined too much to separate completely. Whether it is critical minerals or the technology and others, yes, both countries are trying to reduce their dependence on the other. But again, on certain stuff, they will have to cooperate. This is the stuff that you and I talked about earlier, this kind of a new normal, that they will cooperate and then they will also compete at the same time.
Right. Xiangwei, a final question to you. Peter Hex had framed American policy towards the region as preventing any single power from dominating the region. But China continues to argue that outside powers are destabilizing the region. In some ways, these are really two separate, completely competing visions. What kind of regional order do you see emerging in the Asia-Pacific?
Ravi, you asked a very, very interesting question. I think I remember last year I wrote a article on this, sort of talking about, as U.S. Is withdrawing from the international stage, turning inwards and refocusing on the Western Hemisphere, what China would do. In fact, I remember one of the key arguments I made is this, that even in Asia, China wants the United States to play an important role. China does not want the United States to leave Asia completely. And I mean, Pete Hegseth has made it very clear that U.S. wants to stay in Asia, but he also made it very clear that he wants the U.S. allies in Asia to take up more responsibilities. So, as U.S. indicates it wants to reduce presence in Asia, so that really got certain countries worried, most notably Japan. So I think if you read between the lines from Hegseth's speech in Singapore a couple of days ago, he also sort of hinted that he wanted Japan, Philippines, and the other countries in the first chain to play a more important role. Given the U.S. MAGA policies, this is kind of inevitable. And in fact, this is going to complicate the security situation in Asia. With the United States in Asia, and then the U.S. could provide the security guarantee that the U.S. allies want. If U.S. reduces its presence in Asia, and then certain countries like Japan will have to have different ideas, including increasing sort of military spending, sort of promoting what China called the new militarism, which the Japanese defense minister rejected. So all in all, I think this may come as a surprise to your listeners that, it's my view that China does not want the United States to reduce its presence in Asia. In fact, if you look at it, that is,
yes.
China wants U.S. to play a very important role in maintaining stability and security in Asia, so that China, as we know the world as it is, that China still needs the United States to play that role, so that China can focus more on domestic issues.
Right. That's so fascinating, Wang Xiangwei. I understand that you're off to Harvard Kennedy School for a year as a visiting fellow, as a senior visiting fellow, and I congratulate you on that appointment, and I wish you a very good tour of the U.S. As always, your words are most illuminating, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on Asian Insider.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Ravi. To me, the reason that I'm going to Harvard Kennedy School is because I really want to focus on researching and studying U.S.-China relations, and to see, whether I can help to reduce misinformation, the fake lies about the bilateral ties.
Fascinating.
So that's what I want to do. Thank you for having me, Ravi. It's good to talk to you.
Let me wish you all the best, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
And that's a wrap for Asian Insider. I'm Ravi Velloor. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. And if you'd like to read my articles, we have links in our podcast show notes below. You can also sign up for our Asian Insider newsletter. This episode was produced and edited by Faiz Asani. Thank you for joining us.